Alright, it is now 5:40 in the morning, so, and I haven't slept, so what better time to talk about two movies like this. So just kind of chalk it up to that if I get any particular small details wrong, which I don't think should happen because I've only seen Donnie Darko at least 100 fucking times. And the Butterfly Effect, a couple or a few. So, and obviously this is like sort of right in the middle of our musicals that won Best Picture theme of the month. This is due to an oddly specific request, so we're just going to blow through this real quick, but we'll go right into that whole Dickens thing I was talking about in the next couple of days, and then we'll get right back into that. So I'm sure you're much more interested in something like this anyway. I'm sure most of the people that watch stuff like this are, so why not? So, to start with Donnie Darko, well, even so, I think it's pretty clear what both these have in common. I think they've been compared quite a few times, and one is usually brought up with the other, more so than the other way around. Um, and they both, that's not the only thing they have in common, they both also have a director's cut, which neither of which I'll be talking about. Butterfly Effects is pretty easy because it's like one extra scene and then an alternate ending. Donnie Darko's got like an extra 20 minutes attached to it in its director's cut, and I actually have not seen either of those. I've actually heard that, number one, that the director's cut isn't... not from everybody, but I've heard from some people that it's not as good and it's maybe a bit more pretentious. And I've also heard that Kelly says that he's perfectly fine with this one, and that one is more of an alternate version, not necessarily the one he thinks is the real version. So, yeah, I've just kind of never bothered to look into it that much. There hasn't been enough really to, gravitate me towards it. But I'm sure I will eventually. So, now, and they both have straight-to-video sequels, which I did see S. Dargo, unfortunately. I didn't see the other two Butterfly Effects, but as you can see, I'm not in a rush to get there either. So, now to talk about them individually, we'll obviously start with Donnie Darko, where we start in realizing that it's 1988, because this movie actually got on the 80s nostalgia train long before it was all the rage now. And I had heard actually that Kelly said that makes it actually more appealing is that it wasn't, it was a little bit about the nostalgia factor, but for the most part, it was not only could he throw in the politics, like the whole Bush-Duke August thing, but also it was really just the era that he knew that he could write for characters this young, because he was born in 1975. So it was like young people in the 80s, it's just kind of where his comfort zone was and where he was at the time, so it made it easier to write realistic characters for that era, and that makes perfect sense, and not just doing it for the whole, just because the 80s were cool thing, that we're seeing more and more today. So, and obviously just little details to kind of point that stuff out. One of my personal favorites is the fact that his mom, the first time we see her, is reading It. So, so there's that. So it's at least, maybe 3 years after that book came out. So it still would have been popular, I assume. So yeah, just seeing all that stuff like that, but also knowing that there's a perfectly good reason he said it in that era, just makes it all the better, and makes it more trustworthy about how much he thought it was important to portray the characters accurately. That he'd completely go in a different era just to do so. So that's great. And of course we start off with we see kind of Donnie and his happy family life, where it's like they're almost like overly happy when we first see them with no dialogue. Like I said, when we see his mom reading and stuff like that, and we've got like his dad with like the leaf blower and stuff like that, and the way he tells Mary McDonnell, "You're bitching, but you're not a bitch." They're just such a weirdly happy family. But then when we get like this dinner scene, we see that yeah, they're pretty normal. They go through the same problems. They have the same arguments and all that. He and his mom's relationship certainly isn't perfect when she comes into his room and he just, pushes her away. And to talk about that, to go into Donnie, we'd have to talk about Gyllenhaal, obviously, who of course is great. This was, he had like October Sky at this point, but this was like, this this is where you could see a lot of his future performances. It's my understanding the whole no blinking thing he did for Nightcrawler, he also does here when he's like under Frank's influence, so you can kind of see where he was able to, even at this early of an age, find that creepiness factor that he could later find when we saw him like really break out recently with these characters. He just really pulls himself into. And he definitely does that here too, to where he's able to do the sort of the coming of age style of the movie, to where it's like, yeah, it starts off, and of course it's just this teenager. He has all those problems. He feels disconnected from the world. He feels like he doesn't have a place. He's scared of the unknown. Just all the teenager stuff. He's possibly got a girlfriend situation brewing here. And it's easy to see how the movie got like a cult following, especially with like a teenage audience, because it was not just, you know, the philosophical stuff that's, you know, not to be, you know, not to push people away or anything, but it's the type of movie to where it's like its philosophical points are much more mind blowing when you're a teenager than when you're in your 20s and you've seen the movie 100 times, if you know what I mean. So not to be insulting or anything, but yeah, that's pretty much the way it is. And but then you keep in mind also that teenagers could relate to that, but at the same time this is also a dude that's going through extreme mental illness, potential hallucinations, certainly being bothered by a demonic rabbit that's told him that the world is going to end. Yet they still managed to make him perfectly relatable to the audience that found this movie and still finds this movie, and just really has this like personal connection to it through this character. And that's a big statement to what Gyllenhaal has done here. Something really interesting that I actually only learned recently was Gyllenhaal was doing like one of those SAG interviews like a year or two ago. Actually, probably just last year. I think he was promoting Stronger. And he was telling a story about how when he was cast in this, and he didn't say who it was, but, you know, a simple Google search will tell you. He was real secretive about it, though. He was saying that there was the person that originally had the role of Donnie, but a scheduling conflict made them have to back out. And, like, ever since that happened to this day, Gyllenhaal finds that actor really intimidating because this part was his initially. And a simple research will tell you, there are a few names thrown around, but I am pretty positive it's Jason Schwartzman, which is, number one, a really interesting person to be intimidated by, especially when you're Jake Gyllenhaal, who has played some of the characters he's played. But it also kind of makes you want to go into what seems to be Gyllenhaal's fear here. And it's like, now you just really wonder what that would have been. It feels like it would have been kind of a different movie. And makes you wonder like where their careers would have gone. I think Schwartzman still would have been about on the path he's on now because Rushmore would always exist. Whereas this kind of really seemed to make Gyllenhaal in an interesting way. I said he did have October Sky this way, but I mean to see, more so like the stuff Gyllenhaal's doing now, the really interesting, weird stuff you could see brewing in this performance many years ago. But yeah, that's gonna like forever be this, I do wonder very much how different that movie would have been. So yeah, there is that. So as far as the atmosphere that Kelly's able to grab here, it does feel, I really love like the constant sort of mystery vibe to it. Not just, you know, the whole time travel aspect of it, but also just the whole thing. Well, obviously this goes into it, but specifically the jet engine thing feels like its own self-contained mystery. Even if it wasn't in a story like this, it feels like a Twilight Zone episode, which of course makes perfect sense because we learn how much the Twilight Zone has influenced Kelly, specifically when he made the box. It was like a direct, you know, reference. But he really had a lot of that going on here too. In the way there's like the engine has no origin, so like the FAA guys are like following him around, and you see the guys that, like posing as joggers and stuff like that, and it gives you just this really weird paranoid vibe. And it's like, without the time travel stuff, this movie could have still been this really weird thriller without changing anything, which is really interesting. But no, this movie has infinitely more up its sleeve. So as it goes on also, I mean, we could go through the whole, you know, concept of what exactly is going on and all the time travel stuff, all that stuff he talks about with Noah Wyle and what all it means, what all the symbolism in there, the whole thing about how certain people in the movie are like pawns that are controlled by like a higher power to make these things happen. But I feel like, number one, you probably know all this stuff if you're watching a YouTube video about Donnie Darko already, so it'd be kind of pointless for me to go all into it again. But also, we'd be here all night because there's just so much. But I do want to just touch on some things, not just how, like, how he's able to capture that in such a way, but it's like the way it's. Usually, I'd be really against a movie that you pretty much need a guide to follow. Like, I think there was, like when it first came out, there was a website that, like, guided you along and told you exactly what it was, what everything's meaning was, and all that. And it's sort of like, it's also worth noting, this was the same year as Mulholland Drive, I think, which sort of has that, you know, it does seem like he's going for a sort of, he's obviously explaining a lot more than Lynch ever would, but there's still that same vibe of a movie that just has such a puzzle to it that you can just reach deeper and deeper into. And that's what I mean by, usually I'd be against a movie like this where you have to actually look up what all the stuff means, because it just seems like it'd be so lazy. But it's on a movie-making front. Obviously, to come up with all this stuff is, you know, just going deep into Kelly's mind. But as far as just making a movie, that might seem a bit lazy. But the interesting thing about it is he has so many interesting ideas, and the movie, what little he actually shows of them is still so intriguing and so engrossing that when you do read up on what everything means and just how far, no pun intended, the rabbit hole goes, it just like enriches the whole experience. Like, the more you learn about it and the deeper you dig, just the better it makes the movie, and it makes everything, not only just when it makes it click, but it just brings about that feel to where you feel like there's some higher power controlling everything, and everything that might seem totally off at one point actually does have a greater purpose, even if we never really see that transpire. And that's just, yeah, and that's just one of the things to love about it, which, like I said, usually I would hate about another movie, but this one really pulls it off. And then there is sort of like, well, the one particular one that really stands out there is Sharita, I think is her name, the girl they keep making fun of because of her accent. The one that's like following Donnie around, who like has this weird crush on him, and it's like I always thought it was weird the way she seemed to be like this all-seeing eye. Like, no matter where somebody was or what event was happening, it's like she was always there to witness it. Whether it be Donnie doing something or whether it be after Drew Barrymore's fired, it's like she's just always kind of there. And of course there's the irony of her wearing the earmuffs to block out the bullies, even though she's the eyes and ears of what's going on. And it had never really occurred to me until I was reading more into it about the whole she's a pawn that's placed to basically be exactly that. Not just kind of what the FAA guys allude to, but they're doing it literally for a particular reason that we know, kind of. That she's doing it in like this whole practically supernatural way, as are many of the characters. So all of that just really, like I said, just the more you get to sink your teeth into, just the better it really is to just get all wrapped up in, which is wonderful. But then he throws in some stuff here that I imagine you can take in multiple directions. I'm sure he's got something to say in regards to all of the religious references. I sort of take it in a way that, because obviously there's just the setting of the Catholic school in general, which kind of sets that tone. But then, and I don't know if this is just the way I look at this in particular or what, but the religion aspects really seem to add like a horror quality to it. Like this really sort of, like some of the early scenes in The Exorcist kind of vibe to it. Where we have stuff like when Beth Grant's character is talking about how they need to pray and stuff like that, and it's like she obviously she's already sort of an off character, but when she's talking about praying and stuff like this, she sounds like a character out of like Children of the Corn or something, and it just gives off this almost unintentional. She's giving off this almost unintentional creepy vibe. I don't know if that's what Kelly's intention was, but I'm certainly getting that from the character. And then there's also, just even in passing dialogue, like when Noah Wiley's talking about where the book came from, and he's talking about Grandma Death, and he's saying that, she was a nun, but then just, from out of nowhere, overnight, she, like, just changed her ways and left the church and wrote this book. And it's like, it gives you a really weird vibe of the church that she came from, the way he tells that story. And I don't know if there's just a creepy factor in general that she used to be a nun. Maybe I've been watching too many Conjuring movies. But yeah, those aspects of it, I always feel like just put on this almost Exorcist-like horror vibe underneath it any time the religious aspect is brought up. I think it's a tad overkill that The Last Temptation of Christ is the horror double feature with Evil Dead. I'm not quite sure what that was about. I think I read somewhere like why that was, but I don't recall it. There's just so much to take in. It's hard to remember every single detail, but unless you're like an absolute super fan. But yeah, so. And so I always thought that's kind of added on top of the mysterious Twilight Zone vibe. It also almost had like a horror vibe underneath it. Once again, we're not even talking about the demonic bunny when we talk about this. It's like, oh yeah, he's here also. Though I do say, not so much now, but around the time I first saw the movie, like one of the scariest fucking things I'd ever heard was when Donnie laughs and says, "Why are you wearing that stupid bunny suit?" And Frank says, "Why are you wearing that stupid man suit?" As a kid, that was like one of the scariest fucking things I'd ever heard. But yeah, there's there's so many different ways you can take all this at this point. And then we also have some interesting supporting characters, like Jim Cunningham, for instance, which is kind of almost seems like it's taking this satirical look at, like, the whole, not just fame, but like the whole, motivational speaker type. And this very interesting character that they drop into this movie. And here's the thing about Patrick Swayze playing him, is it's like, when you look at his filmography and the type of actor that the type of movies he was known for being in, this is like it's so admirable when you look at it, because it's like, this, for him to be in this role, for this kind of part, and the directions this character goes, and what's underneath him, it's like, it is so kind of ballsy, and from out of fucking nowhere, for an actor like him to take this part. That's not even to mention the fact that it's kind of a small role for an actor so big and so recognizable. It's like one of those cases where you hear about the actor, the writer and director's, like, original choice for a character, but it's like that choice to where it's like, he was our original choice, but we never would have gotten him in a million years, so we went with this other actor. That's what it seems like. It feels like you'd be reading on, like, a trivia page, Richard Kelly wanted Patrick Swayze for this role, but obviously that was a no-go. But, it's the fact that he's actually in this, playing this character, has always just kind of been mind-blowing to me in a really cool way. And obviously there's some really, the sinister things are kind of always in there, like, one of the things that's, like, I guess recently been getting a lot of attention, I guess people haven't always noticed, is when they're watching the video in school and he's, like, playing with the children and all that, when he hugs the kid, he, like, grabs his ass, and it's, like, plain as day once you notice. And it's, like, it's really just showing you he's just kind of hiding in plain sight. And so yeah, I've always loved not just his portrayal of the character, but that he's even in it. I just love. And then we've got, I mentioned her earlier, but I want to go more into Beth Grant, because Beth Grant is kind of amazing here. Like, she's an actress that's, like, is so perfect at playing these type of characters. Like, she was, the first time I ever saw her, she's the woman whose house they have to go to watch people's court in Rain Man. Then she's the passenger that gets, blown off the bus in Speed. She's Carla Jean's mom in No Country for Old Men. She's the head of the pageant in Little Miss Sunshine. She has just mastered this role, and I don't think she's ever played it to more perfection than she does in this. Just that character that goes up there and goes to, like, the parent-teacher meeting, and she says, as both a parent and a teacher, I transcend the parent-teacher bridge. And of course, the immortal line, sometimes I doubt your commitment to sparkle emotion. It's, like, one of the most famous lines in the movie. It doesn't have much to do with anything, but it's because of her, it's just become this weirdly legendary thing in regards to this movie. And like I said, the fact that she's able to kind of put off those almost like Children of the Corn vibes when she's like really into it, especially the religious aspect. Yeah, I just really, really love this performance so much. And obviously there's more that goes into this movie, and there's also something kind of eerie. It's kind of a weird thing to even go into, and I suppose it's worth mentioning, talking about the creepiness of the movie and the eeriness of it. The whole thing about how this is a movie that its big crucial point, you know, the whole thing that sets off the entire movie, and eventually it comes back around to, is a giant piece of an airplane going through a building and potentially killing somebody. And this was released like a month after 9/11, which means it was shot long before it. So that in itself already kind of gives this whole... Like, when it first came out, people kind of had this sort of reaction to it. But yeah, it's still, you know, like I said, maybe it is a bit insensitive, but it's like, it still kind of just adds to just the whole eeriness the movie already has. That coincidence just kind of looms over it. So that's something to look into, I guess. And so, yeah, and like I said, I understand that it does get a lot of criticism, especially now that some of its audience, as it grows older, is potentially growing out of it. And they're kind of seeing it as this more, like, you know, pseudo-intellectual thing, and this whole thing about, like, it thinks it's deeper than it actually is and all that. But I think that's more about the fact that Kelly is portraying teenagers. So teenagers often think whatever they're saying or thinking is the deepest, most profound thing ever. The main example you look to easily is the Smurfs scene, when Donnie's talking about, you know, the whole... whether or not the Smurfs would gangbang or not. And they make it sound like it's the deepest, most philosophical thing they've ever talked about. And it's like, I don't think that's a fault to the movie, and I don't think it's a fault to Kelly. I think that was Kelly writing teenagers very well. As I said at the beginning, he obviously cared very much about, you know, portraying teenagers the right way. That's why he changed the whole era. So that makes more sense the more you go into it. And it's also, like I said, I do understand if people find it if people are dismissive of it, because if people see a shitload of movies, it won't be a movie. Maybe it won't grab them enough that they'll want to, like, study all the stuff, go in to read all the stuff about the wormholes and the timelines and all that stuff. So they're going to miss, like, a whole bunch of it, and it's going to feel like such an empty movie to those people. Like, it's, like, when, it's my understanding when it premiered at, like, Sundance or something, both Jake Gyllenhaal and Seth Rogen said that they had no idea what it was about. Despite having, you know, read the script and been in the movie and acted it out and everything, they had no idea. Even for Seth Rogen, I kind of get, because he's such a side character, but Gyllenhaal even said he had no idea what the movie was about at the time of its release. So that is saying something. But like I said, it's one of those movies where it's like, you really do kind of have to commit to it if you're going to get anything out of it. Maybe you can get something out of a first viewing just based on the atmosphere alone. But it's definitely going to get significantly more rewarding the more you dive into it. So that's just a matter of, like I said, I understand it may seem lazy for a filmmaker to kind of almost count on that. But there's, like, it's anything but lazy. There are so many ideas, like I said, just keep going and going with this story. And it's, yeah, so I'm not sure if there's anything else I wanted to add. I'm sure I'm going to remember like 3 more things after I've turned the camera off, and it's going to frustrate the shit out of me. But that's pretty much where I stand on it. I hadn't seen it I've seen it like a billion times, but I hadn't seen it in a long time the last time I watched it. And I was really kind of afraid that it wasn't going to hold up, and I was going to see it as more of those, it just thinks it's deeper than it actually is. But No, I still really like going into all that stuff, and I had to look up some of the stuff again because, like I said, there's just so much to keep up with. You're probably not going to remember all of it, so it's always nice to kind of keep a guide nearby as you watch this. Like I said, if you're into that, you're going to get so much out of this and more. I don't even know why I need to say that, as if you haven't seen it. Because if you're watching this, of course you fucking seen it. Because most people have. And I don't think you're gonna watch this if you're not a fan of it, so yeah, that's what I think of it. So let's go on to The Butterfly Effect real quick. A movie that maybe won't hang on as long in the memory. So obviously The Butterfly Effect, referring to, well, I'm sure we all read A Sound of Thunder in school, which was kind of our introduction to the whole theory and all that. That the movie, it does have a very interesting concept here, kind of taking that concept and like putting it in this story that's like very human driven, specifically to its characters and how this would affect over time. It does. I'm sure a lot of people are going to think it's sort of wasted potential because it's like this theory goes so far beyond just a single person's life or a few people's lives. It's like this whole spanning this whole global thing. So it does seem like it's kind of shrinks to go into this concept. But as like a small sci-fi thriller, whatever, it's intriguing enough to work if they do it right. So especially throwing in like some of the really heavy subject matter that they do that you may not expect in a movie that might seem so generic based on advertisements. Obviously, particularly the Eric Stoltz scenes, but some other stuff as well. So when it first opens, though, it might be kind of off-putting because if I remember correctly, it was sort of advertised as like, yeah, as a thriller and somewhat sci-fi, but I feel like there was a lot of horror they tried to pass it off as too, to kind of get that demographic. And you might get that vibe, like a teen horror movie vibe at the start, because the acting's a little shaky, even though we have two reliable actors in the key roles. We have Melora Walters as his mom, and that's young Logan Lerman as him when he's 7. Obviously, Logan Lerman wasn't reliable yet. Certainly he would get much more reliable than he is here. But in this, once again, this may be a cop-out, and I talked about this with the Hal Hartley trilogy, too. I almost feel like the bad acting in the first parts almost kind of enhances it in a way, because it makes it feel like Laura Walters, we know, can be a great actress because we've seen Magnolia and a few other movies, but there's something so weirdly robotic about this performance that it almost kind of adds to the movie's sort of off feel, that these performances don't feel like they're totally what's the word I'm looking for? They're not totally in a particular reality. It almost feels like, and it's like, and obviously it could just be bad acting too. I could be like going way out of my way to defend this, but like the scene when they're going up to the institution and Logan Lerman says, "I don't want to go there. I think it's creepy." And it's just the line deliveries from all actors are just like so way off. I almost struggle to think it's not on purpose. But yeah, maybe it is just bad acting. But to me, it kind of immediately sets me in the vibe of there's an unbalance here that's sort of unwavering and makes it feel like, okay, this is going to get kind of weird. It may be the atmosphere accomplishing that too, and just kind of hiding. Sort of the bad acting kind of gets to hide behind that disguise and just go along with it. That could be the case, because the opening scenes of this movie, like the first half hour or so of this movie, is actually pretty great. Especially when it goes into when they get a little older and they seem like kids like right out of a Stephen King story. Where like they smoke, they're profane, they pull dangerous pranks and all that. Maybe I'm the only person bothered by this, but one of the things that always kind of got to me was that Cameron Bright from Running Scared and Birth plays Tommy when they're little kids, and then when they get to be teenagers, I almost feel like the kid that plays teenager Tommy looks younger than Cameron Bright did, playing him at supposedly 7 or 8. So that always kind of threw me off too. But regardless of that, it does sort of... It really sets up these great scenes. There's one particular visual that I love, and that is when we first see the mailbox that looks exactly like the house before they blow it up. It's just this really cool, sort of surreal kind of shot. And then, yeah, and that's where I feel like the movie is at its strongest points, where we have this whole storyline where he keeps, to use Edward Norton's Primal Fear terminology, he keeps losing time, we'll say. He keeps having these blackouts and waking up, and shit has gone down in these blackouts. And the way it's like, usually when he's, before it happens and after it happens, there's something just really weird and bizarre happening, and it really kind of gives us this, it reminds me kind of, like, the intriguing confusion of it reminds me of Memento. When a scene starts and we don't know where Leonard is and he doesn't know where the hell he is either or what's going on. It feels a lot like that. And we have these scenes where, like I said, we've got Eric Stoltz in the basement, when we realize what's going on here, and then it, like, pans up, and you've got, like, Tommy, like, twisting a doll's head on the steps as he's watching this happen, and it's just this really unsettling shit. Like I said, you don't really expect in a movie this, you know, widely presented to, like, a mainstream audience, but then there's also the whole thing about when he goes to see his dad at the institution, and he's, like, saying, you know, like, it's supposed to be, like, this big grand thing that's going to be this happy part of his childhood where he's like, I finally get to see my dad. I hope he lets me call him Dad. He's dressed up in his little suit or whatever, his little vest or whatever. And then this dude comes out, and there's an immediate change in the atmosphere, and this dude looks creepy and threatening, and we don't know what he's going to do. But then when he sits down, he says, don't worry, I won't bite. And it's kind of calming again, and it's kind of like, okay, even though this dude's creepy looking and in chains, maybe he's not so bad, maybe he will get to call him Dad and all that. But then there's a blackout, and then this dude's on top of him choking him, saying that he needs to die. And stuff like that is just really effective, and just really throwing you off in these really unexpected ways, and gets you on, like, on the edge of just always expect the unexpected, because you never know where this shit's going to go, when he's going to black out, much like the character himself. Like Memento, it just really uses that method and puts you behind that character's eyes, and it's just this really, really well done stuff. And it's, like, this could have been the movie, and it probably would have been really good. But, alas, he's got to turn into Ashton Kutcher, and we've got to time travel. So, not to say the movie gets bad there, and not to say it doesn't have some interesting ideas with this concept. It really does. But the thing, and talking about that real quick, Ashton Kutcher being in the lead was something that was kind of like, had people sort of, because I don't know, I go back and forth on whether or not I like him. Sometimes I don't know. Sometimes I'm like, yeah, he's okay, he's alright, I'm, you know, warming up to him, but other times it's like, no, fuck him. But it's sort of like, at this time, this was one of those cases where he was doing that thing, to where it was like, all we had seen him headline. He had been in some movies like Texas Rangers or something, but he had never headlined a movie that wasn't a comedy up until this point. And it was like this is a role you really have to go into. You really have to commit to this kind of role. And I completely understand being put off by his casting, and going for an actor that's maybe more reliable in this kind of territory. Probably would have had a bigger payoff. But he commits, and one of the things that I think he does best is, and there are probably some disagreements here, but to me personally, as far as I can remember, and given the scenarios that he's in, you gotta keep that in mind, what an actor trying to break out of comedy and doing a movie like this could have done in this scenario was overact the shit out of it. And he doesn't overact it. There are some moments that don't work, but I think it's much more on the writing and the direction than it is him. Like, there are moments that feel silly that probably shouldn't. Like when he went... Actually, in the way it goes, in the way it's revealed to us, the scene where he wakes up and he realizes that his arms were blown off when he was a kid, when he went to the mailbox. Um, it's hard to tell if it's like, it almost has a comedic vibe to it. And to be honest, you can't really tell what it's supposed to be. And that's probably a problem to the casting, but it's also, yeah, it doesn't feel like it's shown to us in a big enough or a frightening enough way for us to know for sure. So I think I put that more in the writing direction than I do him. And there are some silly moments, like when it gets to, there's a point in time in kind of the middle here where it goes into this, like, it has this concept, but then it goes into this really generic thriller territory where Tommy is basically seeking him out for being with Kaylee. So, and then he, like, they set up, like, this whole stalker vibe and this whole creepy thing, but then he just unceremoniously walks out from behind a tree, and then they scuffle, and then Evan uses pepper spray like it's the ultimate weapon. I can't take this scene seriously. I've never been able to. It's horrible. And it just really throws the movie off in this vibe that it could have had going. Like, this whole thriller thing probably could have worked, especially with how short-lived it is, because we're going to keep jumping around anyway. But they kind of fucked it up with it just is way off in execution and unintentionally in tone. I can see on paper tonally it fits, but to actually see it the way they showed it, doesn't. It feels like it takes us off in a totally wrong way, and just comes off really silly. And that's actually a problem, because this movie is actually able to hit us with stuff pretty early that actually works, even though we know the concept. Like when Kaylee kills herself at, like, the very beginning, after we've seen her once as Amy Smart. And it's like, even though we know the concept of the movie, so we know this isn't going to last. We know they wouldn't put Amy Smart's name on the poster or her face if she was going to last that long. She's not Julianne Moore in Children of Men. She's not that big. So what's going to happen here is this should be nothing to us, because we know the plot's going to change it. But when he gets that phone call, somehow it hits. To me, anyway. And I think that's really effective, and they do that really well. So it's such a shame when there are other aspects that go bigger and they can't pull it off. Or even sometimes even not as... I guess it's the simplicity of that, really. To where we don't see it happen, there's hardly any allusion to it. He's just called, and a voice tells him. And somehow that's enough. And so when it's time that they can really show off, they don't have it. they don't. So and then it's one of those cases where another reason where I say it's weird that works so well is the fact that the rest of the movie has trouble working because we get the gist of it so early. So we know it's going to be the thing where, the age-old time thing, to where it's like, if it's going to be bad at the start, no matter how much you change it, it's always going to somehow end up bad, because that's just the way it is. No matter which direction you take to get there, it's going to end bad. So once you get the gist of that, the movie feels very redundant and a bit pointless, because we're always just kind of waiting for that moment where when everything seems fine, it's suddenly not going to be fine. Or they're not even going to waste time. They're just going to go right into, this is how shitty it got, just immediately. And then after that, it just sort of feels like there's not much it really adds. You don't have that edge anymore that you did at the beginning, when you were just really trying to expect the unexpected and it kept throwing you off. This sort of, like, it's literally showing you that it was better off when there were blanks. When you start filling those blanks in, it sort of just goes, and you sort of know what's up its sleeve now. It shows, like, all of its cards to you, basically. And it does feel like, I mean, I guess that does give, like, the actors interesting opportunities to, like, the way they have to play the different characters, like how Amy Smart has to be, like, one minute she's this, and the next minute she's, like, the junkie, and then she's, like, you know, suicidal or whatever. And then Eldon Henson, especially, as Lenny, gets to be, like, you know, a lot of the movie he's, like, mentally ill and just, like, really, really fucked up from seeing that baby explode. But then later on he gets to be like real cool. He's got like his Fabio hair and he's like really laid back. It's like he's playing a totally different character in the same movie, and that's, for an actor, that's got to be, interesting. But still, like I said, it feels like it's not only that, but it also sort of takes you. I mean, it does still have those interesting ideas, like the whole idea. It might seem a bit obvious, obviously, but still, it seemed like they had a direction when we finally come to the conclusion of, like, when he seems to be trying to fix things, it's just like making everything worse, and everything's worse off than it was before. But then finally, in the timeline where everybody's happy and everything's great, he's absolutely miserable. He's an amputee, and his mom has cancer now. And so it just kind of shows you that no matter who is happy, the outcome is just bad, always. So, but that's the thing, though, is that it does feel limited, because especially in that scene after he's in the hospital and they're wheeling him around, and he says, tomorrow I could wake up a dirt farmer in Bangladesh. And then you stop and you think, like, why didn't he? Why couldn't they do that? It's like he always sort of, it does feel like it's very contained, and like I said, maybe it could have gone too over the top if they tried to really expand on it. But still, it does feel like it's a bit too limited, and you do kind of wonder, it's like, yeah, how would he handle suddenly being a dirt farmer in Bangladesh? Like, let's see how he got there, because it does feel like, because this is where I know a lot of people start to have problems with it, and that's the idea of, it seems to, like, sort of cheat. It sort of cheats its logic a little bit, where we have stuff like, when he has to prove to Kevin Durand that he can do this in the jail cell. So he, like, does the whole, spiking his hands things, but it's like, that should have changed everything. He probably wouldn't be in jail at this point, or even if he was, this wouldn't prove anything, because he would have had those when he got in there. I think that's also kind of there, like, there's way too many scenarios where Thumper is still his roommate in college, no matter how many times he does it. There's like that one time when Lenny is, but every other time, no matter what he does in his childhood, Thumper's still his college roommate. And it's like, there are these things to where it's like, it should really be going way off the path every time he does this. And it's like really, really contained in this little area to tell this little story. Like I said, that could work with a better execution, but it does feel like, you don't want them to go way, way out there, because you'll lose what we're trying to pull off here, what this story is trying to get to. But it does feel like you could be doing more still. So that's kind of where it starts to really lose its way, and like I said, definitely doesn't come back from, like, that really good first half hour that it has. So yeah, and it does have, it certainly has its cheesy moments, not just the, unintentionally hilarious stuff I talked about, but also stuff like, that scene, the scene in the junkyard, the timeline where, Lenny stabs Tommy in the back, and Kaylee screams, and it's that very recognizable stock scream. It's where you could feel like the movie getting more and more half-assed as it goes. I also feel like, you know what else I feel like they really half-assed was the Eric Stoltz storyline. Like, I did give them credit for having the balls to go in that kind of territory, but that storyline always feels so unresolved to me. Where it's like, all he does is confront him about it every time. He apparently fuckbag is what makes him, like, really tone it down. And it's like, in the future, we get, like, 10 seconds of him looking like Lance from Pulp Fiction again. And then in the end, supposedly he makes a choice to say, I'm gonna kill your fucking family, get away from me, so that Kaylee and him never even become friends, let alone together, and it supposedly makes her happier, but it's like, in this timeline, is Eric Stoltz still out there doing that, like, to other people? That is just such an unresolved character that's so horrible. And maybe they touched on this and I don't remember it, but it feels like something that's, like, way skipped over for how extreme it is. And that's another case of where it's like, the movie could be doing so many other things, and it feels like it just kind of keeps limiting itself, especially when it starts cheating. So that's pretty unfortunate. And like I said, it doesn't seem like it has as much, thought and care as something like Donnie Darko, of course. And of course, these are the guys that made Final Destination 2. So it's like, yeah, they're not going to have the same care making a movie as Richard Kelly making his first movie that he made from the heart, from the ground up. So, yeah, so obviously, you know, it's always going to be Donnie Darko in a landslide here, but that's not to say the Butterfly Effect doesn't try and isn't absolutely awful. There's definitely some really good stuff in it, but it does fall flat way more times than it probably could or should. So, but yeah, there's still definitely stuff in there that it makes you go back. If you don't absolutely hate it, you'll probably go back to it at least once. So that says something. But as I've been saying this whole time, Donnie Darko is gonna keep bringing you back over and over and over again if you love it enough. So yeah, so there that is. So now that that's done, we will be getting back on track with the musical ones. We've got what, two more of those for this month, and then we'll go into whatever. There's a whole shitload of stuff coming down in regards to what reviews we're gonna have over the next few too. Oh yeah, the versus after we do the musical one is the big MCU retrospective. So there's that. So yeah, until all that stuff